We're going to go ahead and solve quadratic equations by graphing. Now, a quadratic function that we looked at in the last video or lesson had an f of x equals to your quadratic stuff. A quadratic equation is often equal to 0. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be equal to a normal number, but we'll eventually want to get it equal to 0. So it has a 0 equaling your quadratic stuff instead of an f of x equals. It's a quadratic equation because we have an equal sign in here and we only have one variable, which is x. Now the solutions to our quadratic equation are called roots. Now, one method of finding our roots is to really find our zeros. Well, what are zeros? Zeros are really where your quadratic function crosses your x-axis, your x-intercepts. So zeros, x-intercepts, roots, or solutions are all kind of referring to the same thing. Where if you would graph the equivalent quadratic function, it's where you cross the x-axis. So if we want to solve this by graphing, it's a quadratic equation because we have an equal sign in here, only one variable, and in this case it's equal to 0. So we're going to go ahead and graph the equivalent quadratic function. Once again, we'll do the negative b over 2a, tells us the x-coordinate of our vertex. Then we'll go ahead and choose 3 numbers on each side, and then we'll go ahead and make our t-chart. Now remember, we can go ahead and use our calculator to help us with our t-chart. So we can go x squared minus 3x minus 4. Now we're starting at negative 2, so I'm going to go second window and change my table set to my table start then to negative 2, and then I'm going to go ahead and look at my graph. Or not my graph, my table, which is second graph. And then I can just go ahead and look at that table. So we can then graph those points and we get this. Now we're wondering where our function's equal to 0, which is where we cross the x-axis. Well, we can see we cross at negative 1 and we can cross at 4. We also know that we have 2 solutions over here because you can see where your output is 0. That means you're not up and down, so you're right on the x-axis in 2 spots. So whether your output on your table is 0, or if you graph it and you look at where you cross the x-axis, are both ways to find your x-intercepts or your solutions or your zeros or your roots. So we have 2 of them here because we crossed twice. Once at negative 1 and once at 4. So we're going to do the same type of thing here. The first thing you have to do is go ahead and get 0 on one side. So if you don't have 0, you can always get 0 by bringing everything over to one side. Then we have our quadratic equation that we're trying to solve. So we'll graph the equivalent quadratic function. Do the negative b over 2a, and we end up getting 2. Choose your 3 numbers on each side. Use your graphing calculator to get your t-chart. Plot your points. And when you do that, you see that we don't technically cross from one side of the axis to the other side, but we do touch it at one point. And in this case, we touched it at one point, so we have only one solution, and our solution is 2, because that's where we touch at one point. So we want to find 2 numbers whose sum is 4 and whose product is 5. So we want to take 2 things, multiply them together, something here times something here, so we get 5, because product means multiply. Is often means equals in math, so we have 2 things that multiply together to give us something of 5. Well, 2 numbers, I don't know either number, so I'm going to say one of them is x. Well, I know their sum is 4. If you know one of the numbers, you can easily get the other number by just taking it away from 4. Because if I said one of the numbers was 7, well, two numbers that add together to give you 4 would be 7 plus something to give me 4. I subtract 7 from both sides, and it tells me what my other number is of negative 3. So whatever number you know, you can easily get to the other one by just subtracting it from 4. In this case, we're saying we have x. So we can easily get our second number that we're multiplying together by just subtracting it from 4. So we'll go 4 minus x. This is our basic equation. We'll get rid of the parentheses. Now, if we're solving it by graphing, remember we want to get 0 on one side. So we have this. So we'll graph the equivalent function. We'll do the negative b over 2a. Choose 3 numbers on each side. Use your calculator to get your t-chart. Plot your points, and you get this. Now, since we don't ever cross the x-axis, we're going to say we do not have any real solutions. So, we're going to take a look at this one here. We're going to estimate our roots by the same technique. We're going to do the negative b over 2a. We're going to put, and we're going to graph this, go f of x equals this. So negative b over 2a, we end up getting a negative opposite of negative 6 over 2 times 1. So we get 6 over 2, which is 3. Choose 3 numbers on each side of 3. Once again, you can plug this into your y equals in your calculator. Go table set started at 0. Look at your table. You get these points here. And we can graph it. Now, you'll notice that we cross our x-axis between 0 and 1. We also cross between 5 and 6. So we can estimate this. We could say we have 2 answers. One of the answers is between 0 and 1. One of the answers is between 5 and 6. Now, these 2 answers down here that we have, we can get from looking at our graph, but we can also get from looking at our table over here. When our y value goes from just above to just below, we know we have to cross in between those 2 x values. Or over here, when we go from just below to just above, we know we have to cross in between those 2 x values. So whether you're looking at your graph or looking at your table, you can still estimate your solutions. And for the most part, we're going to be estimating it by saying between which 2 integers it crosses.